So, one of the proposed schemes was by David Keith, who's a climatologist from the University of Calgary. He'd come up with this scheme where, and this is where all the chemtrail people get worked up, is that David Keith had come up with a scheme where you could put barium titanate particles in the atmosphere. Now, why he chose that particular compound was barium titanate, you can make little sort of tiny crystalline discs of them, these sort of nano scale, and they would levitate in the atmosphere. They would stay up there because they have an electrical field. There's an electrical field in the atmosphere which acts upon these barium titanate discs, and it causes some type of ionization effect or something. I've got a slide in the book which partly explains this at least. And why he was proposing that is that this would then reflect sunlight and cool the planet. And there's been various schemes like this now. We need to cool the planet, so we'll put sulfur dioxide in, and that will help to reflect some of the sunlight and blah blah blah. Or we'll have a giant solar reflector up in space, and that will reflect a proportion of the sun's heat back into space. But so they're now trying to get a reason to engineer the atmosphere, to do geoengineering. And I actually went to a meeting in 2009, and I spoke at that meeting briefly in the question and answer session. I'll see if I can get the title of this meeting, and it was called "Taking Control of Our Planet's Climate." That was what the title of this, and it was a meeting at the Royal Society. It was a public consultation meeting, and they were talking openly about these schemes that I've mentioned. David Keith was there, and I think Piers Corbyn was there as well. It was certainly the 2013 one.
They've been to a few of these at the Royal Society.
I've been to two of them.
I thought
yeah. We went to one in 2009 and 2013, which I've written about in this book. And so they were openly talking about modifying the atmosphere. In other words, what we've then got is, so we've created the problem, the powers that be, and that CO2 is the problem. People are the problem, people's activity is the problem. So that needs to be solved. How do we do it? We control the climate with some kind of technology. Now, of course, they're saying we do it by spraying chemicals in the atmosphere. One of the other schemes was Thomas Salter, I think that's his name. I haven't got his first name wrong. Dr. Thomas Salter out of the University of Edinburgh. One of the schemes that he proposed, which got into the papers, was like a solar-powered steamship. So you'd have this little ship going in the ocean. It'd have big solar panels on it and a heater, and it would create clouds from seawater. So it would just literally sail it around, for months at a time, or whatever, all the time, maybe permanently, and it'd suck up a bit of seawater, and then it'd just vaporise it to create clouds using solar energy and some more efficient process or something. So it wouldn't actually create any environmental impact of its own other than creating cloud. So, and that was to reflect the sunlight back in space to cool the planet, which of course is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned anyway. So all those schemes have been talked about and are still being talked about now, even as we discuss this, and you can find various research papers. There's a lot of research being done into it. And I mentioned bits and pieces of that research which were mentioned at this conference. But all the while, of course, people are ignoring the obvious weather anomalies which have been photographed around the world. And I've got photographs of some of these, like a straight line edge of cloud, which is just like a shelf of cloud. It's straight for 20 miles, and it's in a straight line. Yeah. And I've got a couple of examples of this, in the book, and a video that somebody did. I'll send you these in the PowerPoint. And then you've got a square cloud. I mean, there's that one there. You can see it's just fairly obvious. That was one from Scott Stevens. You've got a square cloud, and I've got a couple of examples of that. And crisscross lines, of trails across the sea. You've got these things like fall streak or hole punch clouds. You've got these circular donut clouds. You've got these crescent-shaped clouds, which are put on the cloud appreciation side. I don't put that picture in the book. So what are these weather anomalies? And they're probably talked about less than chemtrails are, but to me they're just as significant, if not more significant, than the chemtrails. So really what I think that is evidence of is ongoing geoengineering. And I don't think it's been done by spraying toxic chemicals in the sky. I think it's been done using some type of energy manipulation technology. So you might say, well, Andrew, how do you come to that conclusion? Well, I say, well, because if you start to look at chapter 11, you'll look at some of the things in there. I mean, one of the things I mentioned, which everyone else mentions, but I don't think it's a prime mover, is HARP.
Oh, yes.
We do know that HARP beams energy into the atmosphere. It's an ionospheric heater. It's a phased array antenna, which was designed by Bernard Eastland, who's now dead. He died about 5 years ago. And they did actually manage to modify the atmosphere. They created a plasma ring which was visible from the ground. That was, again, I've referenced that in the book. So you learn about things like that.
Would you say HARP is one of the main
components of geoengineering? No, I think
a lot of people do, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Correct.
I think HARP has become, again, it's become like the bombs and thermite of the 9/11 movement.
Yeah.
In other words, it's important to look at what HARP does in the same way it's important to look at what happened on 9/11 and try and work out what it's doing and what was done. Yeah. But I think it's blamed for too much. I think if you look at the power levels and stuff, although it's pretty big, I think it's less than the power in a single thunderstorm, for example. There's much more power in a single thunderstorm. And also it's not just HARP, of course. There's one in there's the ice cap facility in Norway. So there's that one. There's one in Australia, which I think might be near where Pine Gap is. There were two in Alaska. There was one at Poker Flats and there was one at Gakona. I think they shut the Poker Flats one down. I briefly mentioned that in the book. I think there's meant to be 10 of these ionospheric heaters around the world. Some people claim that there's one in Wales as well. And I think Harry Rhodes has been there. There's videos of that. I don't know whether that. I've not been there. I haven't studied that much. I don't think I mentioned that in the book. So I think these ionospheric heaters, though I probably am not happy about them being there, I don't think they're not, for example, creating the large-scale weather modification which we've seen on various occasions now. Again, you can watch the channels like Weather War 101. That's a good YouTube channel where he goes through some of these satellite videos that he's captured. And there's various satellites which are capturing different types of data. There's one that fires microwaves and gets a reflection from that. There's some that's radar, there's some that's optical, there's some measuring wind speed, for example, and you can get all those put onto the same sort of 3D map. There's a chap called Jim Lee, who I mentioned in the book. He's got this site called climateviewer.com. It's an amazing website. Collates all this climate data onto a map, and you can flick through it in real time. Amazing stuff. Dutch Sense has also done some very, very interesting videos about weather events which don't seem to fit a standard model of what they've should do over the years from averaging out things. So you can watch those videos and watch those channels. I recommend that you do that if people are interested in. That's Weather War 101 and the Dutch Sense videos, and there are a few others as well. There's also this guy called Ben, I forget his second name. He's got a channel called Suspicious Observers. It's got a 0 rather than an O somewhere. I think for the observers, I think it's actually a 0 rather than an O. But if you put Suspicious Observers, you'll find that channel. That's got some very interesting videos. But we're sort of getting to sort of the punchline in one sense, if you can call it that. I know that geoengineering technology is real. And I don't think it's to do with spraying chemicals in the atmosphere. I don't think it's to do with HARP either, and that's because of what happened on 9/11, which was only revealed to me by Dr. Judy Wood in 2008. It's February 2008, and that is again partly what's illustrated on the cover of this book with. Hurricane Erin.
Yes.
And that really is sort of the last part of the book, or nearly the last part. Well, it's the last part of the weather part of the book, really, because I've got a bit about energy and things at the end. Again, to understand this, you need to understand what happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to this in all of the talks because it really has been a kind of central nexus point of understanding, really. Because everyone knows that the World Trade Center was destroyed, and people have argued about the destructive mechanism. Is it bombs, as I said? Is it an energy weapon? Is it nuclear devices? And that keeps circulating round and round and round and round. But the thing that is least talked about is Hurricane Erin, in my experience. Very few people will talk about it. And I may have mentioned it, I'm sure I mentioned this when we did the 9/11 talk, but it's pertinent to mention it again here as a summary.
It does link into
It does, very much so. So Hurricane Erin, it was given a name on the 1st of September as a tropical storm. It moved across the Atlantic towards Bermuda. It had gathered some strength by then, and it hit Bermuda on the 7th of September. I think it was like a category 3, I think, something like that, or category 2 maybe. But anyway, it hit Bermuda on 7th September 2001, did a bit of damage. That was reported on CNN. And then it started moving in a straight line. Where was it moving in a straight line to? New York City. And it was moving in a straight line for 4 days. Yet there was no real there's no outcry. There's no saying, oh, we need to evacuate, that didn't really happen. Now, I think the claimed reason for why that didn't happen is that there was a cold front coming in moving from west to east, and Hurricane Erin was moving from east to west. And so I think the weather people claim that, they knew that this cold front was going to sort of meet the hurricane and then make it dissipate and go to the right. But whether that's a valid explanation or not, only they would probably know better than I do. But the facts of the matter are that at 8 o'clock in the morning of 9/11, that hurricane was closest to New York City. It was a category 3 storm, and at that point, 8 o'clock in the morning, 9/11, it was at its widest extent of the actual storm system. It was also moving at its slowest speed, as in terms of the movement of the whole storm system as a whole. I'm not sure about the wind speed. I think the wind speed was still pretty severe. You could just see it in the distance from New York. Way off in the distance, you could see the edge of the storm system, very edge of it, just. But as we all know, you had to be in the right place. As we all know, it was a beautifully clear, sunny day on 9/11, if you've watched the videos. So it was, as I say, just there, just as the events were unfolding. If you look at the data in Dr. Wood's book, she shows you that the wind speed in New York City remained constant, I think, for, I forget the exact length, but throughout the events of 9/11 at least, but wind speed was constant, I think, for 12 or 16 hours. Temperature was constant for 12 or 16 hours. Barometric pressure was constant for 12 or 16 hours throughout the events of 9/11. All three were constant, all throughout the events of 9/11. What happens the next day? Hurricane Erin starts to move off, did a right-hand turn, and moved off out towards Newfoundland. Right? So, what's the deal, folks? Now, you can go and check all that data. In the second 9/11 book I've got done that you've got there, 9/11 Holding the Truth, I tell you what happened in 2010 when Dr. Wood went onto this program called The Power Hour with Joyce Riley, who's since passed on. She actually tried to introduce doubt that this hurricane was real. And they had a caller who called in, who was given airtime, pointing out that Judy Wood was lying because Hurricane Erin wasn't Hurricane Erin in 2001, it was in 2004.
Right.
And that statement stood for about half an hour before Joyce Riley says, oh yeah, well, sorry, we've checked, and yeah, she is right, it was Hurricane Erin in 2001. So that caller was allowed to put that disinformation out, and it went unchallenged in the program. And eventually, Dr. Wood was able to answer the question, but for part of that response, for part of that exchange, her microphone was muted by Joyce Riley, so she couldn't respond.
Right.
Such as the sabotage.
Yeah. So that was censorship of the Hurricane Erin information on a program which was meant to be, an alternative knowledge type program. They were talking about 9/11 being done, not being done by, hijackers and stuff. They'd already covered that ground many times in Joyce Riley's Power Hour, but this apparently was too much for them. They tried to cover it up. And there's a whole chapter about that in the 9/11 Holding the Truth book, which is also a free download. But the other thing I wanted to say was, and why I ended up putting this book together, is because even things like Weather War 101 do not mention Dr. Judy Wood's research. In fact, Weather War 101, the channel I mentioned a few minutes ago, did a whole video, and not too long ago, I think it was only a couple of years ago, about Hurricane Erin. They did not mention where did the towers go. They did not mention the events of 9/11 and the connection to that. Even though this channel is showing evidence of global geoengineering going on, they did not mention that book. And it's been the same, I think, with Dutch since, and all the other people that have talked about weather modification do not mention that book and its reference to the very same sorts of topics that they do. Right?
It's as if they don't want to be associated with Dr. Judy Wood's
Well,
work.
we can speculate about the reasons,
But it's
but they did not include that information in their videos, and most of them have not done that. And I've tried to approach Piers Corbyn, for example. I approached him about it, because this 2013 meeting that I went to, the Royal Society, he was there, and he did a very good job of taking some of the statements of the scientists and taking them to task over these statements. But it was because he has this weather action site that he runs. He talks about the influence of the sun more, which I think is more accurate. But I think even for him, it's beyond the pale to say that they are manipulating the weather, and they've been doing it probably for at least 20 years, probably 30 or 40 years. So back in the 1950s, Wilhelm Reich was developing these orgone accumulators based also on his research into orgone energy, and he realised that orgone energy was involved in affecting things like cloud formation, and that's where he built these cloud busters. He built them at his ranch in Maine, I think it was. Organon, he called this ranch, and he was changing the weather. That's what he was doing, and other people have reproduced this, and so this technology was known by Reich in the 1950s. Other people have used it since. Kate Bush's song Cloud Busting from the 1985 album Hounds of Love, that's about Wilhelm Reich and his weather modification experiments. Now, without going into all the details, I think whoever, the US Air Force or whoever it was, have copied that technology. They've got their own version of it. Maybe they've got some hardware up in space. Maybe it's all ground-based. I really don't know. But they're using that to modify the weather. That's what I've concluded in this book. And also there are other psychological operations going on to prevent people, in my experience, from reaching that conclusion. I'll give you another example, which I was discussing the other night with somebody. Now, I've been talking about Hurricane Erin, because of Dr. Judy Wood's research, and she's been talking about it, of course, herself, since 2008. It's now over 10 years since we started talking about it. 10 years we've been talking about it. I've published 2 books since then. Dr. Wood's published a book. Richard D. Hall has spoken about it on the programs he's done, and a couple of other people have mentioned it, but it's still not that widely known. I've spoken to people who've never heard of it. And then I had this other experience last year. Now, I was invited to go to a conference in Greece, and there was another person going to this conference in Greece who was going to talk about Wilhelm Reich's research and orgone energy and weather control, so forth. But it turns out that this other person, who I won't name for the purposes of this, but you could find out who he is quite easily. He was going to present his own research and developments of Reich's research, which he's got very well known for, and he's been doing cloud busting. He was doing cloud busting in I think he did it in Israel, he did it in Saudi Arabia, he'd done it in Ethiopia, and this is like 20 years ago, with certain types of results, positive results, I should say. But also he seems to think that Muslims were involved in the destruction of the World Trade Center, from what he posts on the web. Now, I was scheduled to speak at this conference, or had been invited rather to speak at this conference in Greece last summer, but the conference essentially was about Wilhelm Reich's research more than it was about the sorts of things I've spoken about, although obviously, as we said, it's linked together. And I was kind of I was just speaking on about my stuff and he was speaking about his stuff, but the group of people that were going to the conference were primarily interested in the Reich stuff, and hopefully they would learn a bit more about the sort of stuff that I've talked about as a result of learning about Reich.
Yeah.
But this other guy, he was the main Reich guy, so I won't name him, but you could find out who he was. Now he found out that I had done talks about 9/11 to show how the World Trade Center was destroyed and that it wasn't Muslims and there's no possible way that they can be blamed for what happened to the World Trade Center. And when he found out I was going to be at the conference, he refused to come. He refused to come to the conference. But they based their whole conference and invested quite a bit of money in having him there because he was going to do a whole day basically. I was only going to do one talk and he was going to do a whole day. All the right stuff. There's lots of aspects to the right stuff, Good luck to him. I think it's great stuff, And I think what he's done is pretty amazing, frankly, from what I've heard. But didn't want me to be there. Did not want me to be there, and they uninvited me from the conference so that he could go, and I ended up not going.
Okay.
I know you've kind of like compared Wilhelm Reich with Nikola Tesla, the way with energy,
yes,
and with the cloud busting,
right,
of how it is, which I can see where you come from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Wilhelm Reich and Nikola Tesla had a kind of similar fate. They worked in different areas, but they'd done their own science independently, and they had their own laboratories, they had their own equipment. What they'd done was very good. I mean, Reich, for example, developed experiments to show that life can arise spontaneously in a sterile beaker with, I think it's potassium chloride and iron filings. You heat that up in a beaker, boiling, make it boil, then leave it for half an hour, and after about half an hour, and after it's cooled, you get little things moving around inside the beaker, little tiny things. They're not bacteria because you've sterilised all of that, and they evolve as well in a period of a few hours into other little moving things, and they're motile, they move under their own accord. He called them bions. Other people say this is impossible. You can reproduce it. There's videos of this being done on YouTube. You need, I think, 5,000 power microscope to see them. So you need a bloody good microscope, basically. But you can see them. They're very tiny, like pre life form, But yeah, so the situation is that the information about Hurricane Erin is being censored. Almost out of all awareness, just about. And the people that, again, like the destruction of the World Trade Center, the people that should be talking about it are not talking about it. The ones that you'd expect to be talking about it are not talking about it. They're not mentioning it, and that's still true 10 years on. And I don't fully understand the reasons for that, but I do talk about consensus thinking. And this is sort of outside the consensus thinking, because once you get into this scale of geoengineering, it's very, very difficult for people to accept that it could be going on. Even those that have looked at the issues with chemtrails and stuff like that. And a lot of the people say that have looked at chemtrails, they'll have looked at 9/11 and just read about nuclear bombs. Oh yeah, it was nuclear bombs that did it. But because they don't have a science background and they haven't looked at all the individual bits, which we've discussed, some of which we've discussed before, they won't get it. They don't get it. They just think it's conspiracy stuff. They're into conspiracy stuff, and they don't pin down the details. But the other thing, going back to your question about Reich and Tesla again, in essence, that question, energy, it's to do with energy. How do you modify the weather? You use energy.
Exactly.
How do we change the way that we create pollution? How do we stop human beings creating pollution, carbon dioxide, whatever it is, by changing the way that we use energy? And then the final chapter of the book really is about just a bit on free energy, like Morey's device, which was in the 1920s, where he had this device which would generate, I think, 100 kilowatts or something, just out of thin air, basically. And then we have cold fusion, which I think we talked a little bit about before. So in other words, the global warming thing is a lie from both sides. It's a lie from both sides. The actual phenomena is a lie. The solution to it is a lie. All right, in terms of what we need to restrict our carbon emissions, all of that. But we already have the solution. Even if it was a problem, the solution has been suppressed anyway.
Yeah.
Because we have the technology to generate free energy, and again, it comes back to 9/11. That technology was demonstrated on 9/11, a version of it in weaponized form. And so that is the real situation. We've been given a lie to control us. The solution to that, what is essentially a non-existent problem, has been suppressed as well. And then you've got people arguing about the original lie, who are then themselves lying about the reality of free energy. So really, when you get to the point that I'm at, you're in a very sort of lonely place.
Or nowhere to research it or anything.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
even
yeah.
think about researching it.
Yes. So what that really was why I created this book, to essentially put all that information together, both to say, look, we know the climate change story is bogus. Here's both sides of that argument, but they're both wrong. Then they're telling us that we need to control our use of energy. Well, yeah, true, but this is the free energy. And anyway, the weather's not changing because of human activity, or probably not that. It could be part of the sun, but then there's geoengineering going on already. So the final thing, which I haven't said, which I think is why they've put all this propaganda out, is it's so that when the weather is obviously being changed, they've then got it in people's heads that they're doing it for our benefit, because they've got all the Agenda 21 thing in. They got to the point maybe in 20, 30, 40 years where they've got these experiments running, working. They've got the programs now to do the geoengineering, but they've already been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years already. They've just given themselves the excuse they needed by generating 50 years of propaganda and basically brainwashing the scientific establishment.
And sell it to us.
And you need to control the conspiracy community as well, because they factor into this in a small way, but they do factor into it, particularly since the birth of the internet. I put this book together in about a month or something, or 6 weeks or whatever it was, because I had all the information ready. If I didn't have the internet, and I self-published it, so that's got to be a factor. They've got to be able to limit the effect that sort of thing has, because it's much easier for people to do it now. I couldn't have self-published this book like this 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. It would have been impossible. It would have taken me 5 times as long to do it. So they've got to keep it. They've got to keep a handle on that. So that's why they control the debate. They control the debate in the universities, they control the debate in the media, but they also control it on YouTube as well. And within the sort of
it's all been modified now. More and more so. On the internet,
And and essentially so those things are all in this book, and I give evidence for why those things are true. And really, I think that's pretty much I've covered what's in the book, and the rest is really the devilish details, if you want to call them that. And so I do encourage people to read it. It's obviously an issue that's very current. We hear about it every day. It's rammed down your throats. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to recycle, blah blah blah. And I do recycle stuff, but I don't. I get annoyed when you hear all this propaganda. And it's you just know there's a better alternative, and there has been for decades. Yet we are being prevented from knowing about it.
Just quickly before we know, and there's a lot of talk about plastic as well. What are your thoughts on that? Because we're being bombarded with plastic usage and
well, this is it. I mean, I don't know.
Oceans being wrecked by it.
Absolutely, and that is a huge problem. I mean, I'm not denying any of the environmental problems. I'm not accusing me of anyone, but it may come across that way if people haven't heard the whole interview. But some people say, for example, that there are compounds in plastic such as these dioxins, but they're estrogenic. So they reduce male fertility and that sort of thing. That there's some of that in plastics as well.
Okay.
I think that's been known for at least 10 years, probably 20 years. I think there's a factor of that. So yes, there is some. In other words, you could factor in this use of plastics widely and the environmental damage that's created by them as being part of the war on terror, as in TERRA, the war on planet Earth.
Oh, yeah,
There's some people, and I sort of have some sympathy with that view, that there is a wish to damage the planet Earth. They think it's a conscious entity in of itself, and I can't. I think that might be true. Basically, it's hard to sort of go into that quickly, but I think so that could be an issue. But my point is that if you have free energy, you can convert any material to any other material that you want because you've got enough energy to do it.
This is my next one. The alternative to plastics is already they could do that anyway.
You could have something alternative to plastic, or you could keep plastic just as it is, but make sure that all the plastic was incinerated or zapped with an energy beam to convert it back into basic materials. Because with a free energy system, you can use the energy however you want. So and in essence, what we found out as well, really, with the cold fusion issue is transmutation, is that the technology which we're talking about, I think, can be used to actually make elements, not just materials. It could be used to make gold from lead. Literally, it's an alchemical process.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything is up for grabs once you understand what this technology is and can do. And including new types of plastics or materials that have certain properties which are better than plastic, or just that we could then make the plastic into something else very easily without any real financial expenditure or penalties if we have the right technology. So again, I've put a little bit about that in the book, in that we have if we had access to this technology, we could have a completely different way of living. But somebody doesn't want that. And it's not me. That's why I'm not part of this I'm not part of the we that's destroying the planet. Because we've been co-opted into that by somebody else. I'm part of that the we that's been co-opted, but I don't want to destroy the planet. That I want to be given the options that will, make it so that doesn't happen, or happens to a far, far less serious extent than it's happening now. And the people in the Club of Rome and people connected to them know that is a lie. And we've been fed a lie about all of this stuff. And it's time that they should tell us the truth. But they're not going to do it. They're not going to do it. They're just evil psychopaths.
Exactly.
So they're not going to do it.
Wow. It's been incredible. Thank you again, Andrew. We've covered quite a bit, I think.
Yeah, great. And anybody that wants to write to me about anything that's in the book, if there are any mistakes in it that people find, check theevidence.com, contact me, and I'll try and respond.
Yeah,
excellent.
We'll put all the links on.
Yes, we will indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much again, Andrew.
Another
brilliant talk.
As always.
Look forward to the next one.
The next one, yeah. What's next?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Andrew.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very much for watching the video. Really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and I hope you did, please give it a little like, and of course, subscribe to our channel.
We also have our Facebook account, information is below, and the ways you can fund us is also down below. And remember, let's unite and not to fight.
And together we can unite this planet better. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.